That is
Oh, mama, I can hear you crying. You're so scared and all alone. Hangman is coming down from the gallows and stop.
All right, you like the Steelers over the Eagles this weekend. I see where you're going there. All right, last hour. This is a great song, especially if you're at a Steelers game and they start playing this and the Terrible
Now you
Towels
can
are
do the
rolling.
scores, yes.
Yes, there you go.
Put 'em up. Gary, put 'em up. You better put them up. Put them up. There you go. Jimmy?
I thought he was going to put up a different finger, but okay.
What's that? Why
It's a 4.
Why are you putting up 3, Gary?
Then you know I'm missing a digit?
He's chasing 3.
Yeah.
Get it?
Let's welcome in before this goes completely off the rails, Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. Good morning, Schaefer.
Just requesting the intro music there, but
Sorry, Schaefer, say that again. We didn't see you. You weren't plugged in properly. Say that again.
Man, everything's a mess today. I was wondering if I should go back to requesting the intro bed music when I come on again.
Yes, that is your thing.
Yeah, you should. I'm sorry. That was my request in that.
That was all Matt.
Mike. That
he
was
asked
all me.
very nicely, and I couldn't let him down.
No, that's fine. I before we get too far into this, I do want to congratulate Matt on this role that he has now achieved, and I look forward to verbally sparring with him every Friday for the rest of eternity.
Mikey, it's great talking to you, my man. There's no sparring here. I concede that the Vikings are what I thought the Bears would be this year, and the Bears are what I thought the Vikings would be. And I'm just going to lay down my sword, and I'll see you next season, okay?
All right, well, we can pick that up in the offseason.
We'll pick it up in the offseason. Your quarterback is overrated, and your team isn't going to go very far. But we'll pick it back up in the offseason.
How can my quarterback be overrated when nobody wanted him?
Everyone's just flaying. Oh my God, Sam! Oh my God, Sam! MVP Sam! He's so great. He's so cute. USC Sam! Oh my God! Oh my God! That's okay.
It would have nothing to do with his literal on-field performance. It's just what Colin Cowherd saying. That's what I understand from you.
Listen, don't worry, man.
He loves him some Colin Cowherd.
I am a Colin,
which explains a lot. I'm learning in this week. You have the best head coach in the division, in my opinion, in Kevin O'Connell.
By far. So I didn't say anything bad about your coach. Your coach is awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's between him and Dan Campbell for the best post-game speeches in locker rooms. Mm-hmm. Those guys they're very good at it. But if you notice, they're using note cards. So I don't know how we feel about that. Like, should it be more extemporaneous from them? Should their note cards be taken away? Or do you feel like this is more performative?
I think it's more performative. I think he's going with it. You know what I'm saying? I don't think he's writing these down before he gets on air, but gets to the guys. I think this is from the heart.
I think there's an element of that. I don't know. Maybe it's just the statistics that are on the note card, but I've noticed it from both of those guys now, and they're very good at what they do.
Now, do you if it is written out though? Like let's be honest here. If it is like written out and acted upon before they get to the locker room, does it really matter if it gets the wanted effect you're looking for? Like if it rallies the troops and the guys love it, does it matter if you practiced it in your mirror before you went to the locker room?
But I think we all want to believe that it's just like this thing that sort of comes out at the end of the emotional 60-minute battle that's a football game.
Sure.
But the reality is it's probably not necessarily rehearsed, but it certainly isn't just like spur of the moment.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. But hey, great content.
We retired Calabraska. We've got Flobraska rolling. Are we going to do KC Aska, or are we going KC Huskers here?
I don't know. That's a
question you're going to be asked all day.
Canbraska? Canbraska?
Canbraska. I think KC Huskers is probably the safest. It kind of fits because then in that way you get both Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri without offending one side or another, I suppose. So, I mean, it's pretty remarkable that it has flipped as hard as it has, an area that Nebraska usually has struggled in here in the last, I don't know, decade or so, really, since John Garrison left. I don't think Nebraska's been particularly good in the state of, Kansas or Missouri as it relates to the kind of Kansas City and the suburbs that surround the area. I mean, John Garrison was a huge part of finding and unearthing some really talented guys in the Bo Pelini era. And then you move on to Mike Riley, and they certainly went into Kansas City, and they had Mario Goodrich committed, Bo Wilson, and Javion McQuitty. And then after that, when Ryan Held got here, you thought Nebraska would go right back into Kansas City with success, and they never did. And here's the part that I think.
And you're right. Hey, Schaefer, you were right. Ryan's a Kansas City guy too. Yeah, right. That's a good call.
For they put effort into it initially, and then it was just like, we'll get players elsewhere. And, at that same time, roughly 2017, 2018, you look at the teams that started going into Kansas City, or the teams that have always gone into Kansas City, and you start to notice Kansas State playing really good football. Iowa State playing really good football.
Yeah.
Wisconsin starts pulling players every year out of Kansas City. Michigan and Jim Harbaugh love to go into Kansas City. Oklahoma going into Kansas City. Like it's all of these other teams that are winning a bunch of football games are going into the closest metro area to Lincoln, Nebraska. And Nebraska isn't pulling anyone from there. And no one's interested in their program, despite it being 2.5 hours away from some of the suburbs. And so to me, it's a huge, huge deal that Jamar Mosey is involved and has helped flip that area, because I think there's a lot of talent there. I think you can get 2 to 3 players a year, and hopefully that 2 to 3 turns into really solid contributors and in some cases stars, and you build back what should have been an obvious, easy pipeline for all of eternity.
So, Mike, like you said, you brought up Jamar Mosey. That guy's been massive in order to get these KC Huskers, and not only in high school recruiting, but now transfer portal recruiting. And it's kind of flipped the momentum of the program after losing to Iowa. Let's go to more transfer portal targets. Rhule yesterday, for the first time really in his tenure, was like, look, we're going to embrace the transfer portal. Like we have to go and get guys. And he talked about how just things are changing, the philosophy is changing, and so they're going to be aggressive in this portal to try and replace some of the pieces that they've been losing with the departure of Knighton and White. So, who are some guys that we should be looking for that are visiting, that are guys that are on the radar? Just kind of give us the skinny here. Who are some of the names that could end up being Huskers in the future?
Well, they just had Jonah Pace on campus here. On I want to say it was Thursday. Wednesday, Thursday, Jonah Pace was here. They've got a handful of wide receivers that have shown interest. Here's the problem, Matt and Gary. Sorry, I should include both of you on this. In the current age of the transfer portal, an agent or even a player tells you that they're taking a visit. It's all incredibly fluid. Like it's honestly really hard to determine if a guy is actually going to come in and make it in for a visit, because you have cases like the Graham linebacker from Florida State, who was all set to follow Phil Simpson visit Nebraska. He's going to go to Kansas. And then he was able to renegotiate a deal with Florida State and stayed with the Seminoles. You have, guys who have fly-by-night agent operations that are telling everyone where these visits are, and it turns out they're not even talking with the schools that are in question. And so there's actual people that Nebraska is recruiting, and some of them aren't going to be, as big of names as what you want, but they've got a punter coming in from Washington this weekend, or maybe is in here today, a long snapper from New Hampshire. There's a kind of reserve offensive lineman from Michigan who is high on Nebraska's radar. Cameron Olds is an outside linebacker from, I believe, Kent State, is coming in for a visit. And I think this is all going to kind of ramp up and pick up as we get into the next week. But it's been kind of fascinating to me how wildly different this portal season is compared to previous ones. Like it feels like the entire model has just been shattered, and it is the biggest free-for-all money grab that honestly I've ever seen. And it feels like we're just heading to where this thing gets so broken that the people involved have to collectively work together to put it back together. Like, and I don't mean to be fear mongering, but this is not a sustainable way for anyone involved in this sport to see the sport go forward.
No, and let's hope the craziness of this year is just a 1 year thing with the cut down to 105. But I'm in agreement with you. This is not sustainable. From Nebraska's perspective, would you rather have a top 5 high school recruiting class or a top 5 portal class with the current setup? The current setup being the current staff.
I would always take the top 5 high school class. I mean, I'm just going to bet on those evaluations and that talent over sort of the guessing of a top 5, transfer portal class. Like, didn't we just watch Florida State add a bunch of talent after they went 13-0 and then they went 2-10? So it's like, I just have a stronger belief that you're still going to be better off. Like, you have to be able to use the portal. Like, you have to be able to do both. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use the portal, but I just have a stronger belief in the ability to go get a top 5 recruiting class and try to foster and nurture and develop that going forward. And you're going to lose some pieces from it, but you're not going to lose everything versus, the top 5 portal class. And honestly, it's just kind of going to depend on where you are as a program. I think for Nebraska right now, they would trade a top 5 high school recruiting class for a top 5 portal class, even if maybe the portal class gets them 1 or 2 more wins in the 2025 season. I just think long-term, they would be so much better off if you were able to recruit at a top 5 high school level rather than, the gamble that is the transfer portal.
So, Mike, you kind of talked about this thing is the absolute wild. Well, here's the thing. We called this thing the Wild West last year, and somehow it got more wild this year with just how everything has been moving, which seemed quite impossible. What are and I'm kind of making you the commissioner here and putting the big thinking cap on you, but like, what are some of the things that you would do or you would try to implement in order to make this more cohesive and to make it more of a linear, fluid type situation and just easier on everybody?
Yeah, I mean, you would have asked me this several years ago, I would have scoffed at the idea of contracts, but I think that's sort of what has to happen.
Yeah.
Because I think that there has to be some level of structure that doesn't currently exist.
Yeah.
And the hard part is the answer that would have made the most sense before the United States government got involved in it would be the restriction of transfers. Because frankly, what kills this sport right now, and when I say kills this sport, like when they go to play the playoff games, I'm going to be watching like everybody else, and it's going to be enjoyable. When they actually play games, the sport is as vibrant and as alive as everything else.
Love me some Saturdays
of the year. Yeah, and it's just, it's everything else that sort of just sucks the life out of it. But the fact that you could transfer every single year of your career is just completely and utterly, like, it will make for a horrible viewing experience. The amount of sort of guys that we've already seen that have been to 3 schools and are back in the portal again, there has to be some way to combat this. And now I know that, like I said, we've already gotten the government involved, and so you can't restrict free movement. And yet at the same time, there has to be a way that if someone has transferred multiple times, they lose a year of eligibility or something. Like you just can't allow that aspect to dominate so much of what's going on in this sport. And I think you want to avoid mercenary football. It's one thing if we're talking about a 32-year-old NFL cornerback that, Patrick Peterson, he finishes up his run with the Cardinals and then he's just kind of moved from team to team to team as long as he can play and grab a 1-year, $7 million contract. But that's a totally different thing to me than, a guy who has a nice year at Kent State, gets into the portal, moves up to Indiana, has a great year at Indiana, decides he wants to parlay that into Notre Dame, has a so-so year at Notre Dame, and he's getting pushed out, so now he's got to go to Northwestern. Like, nobody wants that.
Yeah.
How it is for you, Matt, because you're younger than I am, and I'm younger than Gary is, and I fall right in the middle of us. But there was something amazing about growing up where you knew a guy who was a sophomore was going to be on your roster as a junior, and you got to see the fruits of the labor and the work that they put in. And I feel like the sport loses that the closer it gets to just mercenary football. Well, I hate being the doomsday sayer of this.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to see the sport completely devolve into this.
Well, I think, Mike, like, for me, I was a massive fan of the NBA growing up. Like, that was my league. That's what I watched. That's what I loved. But as time moved on, right, we started getting these super teams and we started getting these superstars hopping from team to team. And it was almost like every 2 years, it was a completely different Bulls team that I was rooting for, right? Especially after like the Derrick Rose era. And there wasn't any of those players on the Bulls that I could latch onto and love because they were always moving. And I think the NBA has fallen in popularity because of that. And I think that what you're talking about is a little bit of a similar model where it's like you can't watch guys come on, be a freshman, right? Not play. Then sophomore year, they're a little bit on special teams. Then their junior year, they're a starter. Then their senior year, they're a superstar. There's no more, you're not great. There's no heartfelt strings like you were talking about. There's no more just connection to that player because you know what? They're here 1 year. You're really excited that they came. They're a 4-star prospect. Man, he's going to do some great things for us. And then all of a sudden he transfers to Michigan. And it's like, oh, so well for that. And then it makes fans not want to get excited about high school recruits that they really, really like coming to their team because they don't know if they're going to ever play for their team.
Yeah, and the other thing it does is it creates insane expectations for every single year for every player.
Yes.
Like, Nebraska just picked up Williams Danwinery yesterday, and if you ask any Missouri fan, he's a massive bust because as a freshman, as a 19-year-old, he didn't dominate in the SEC. He struggled. I don't know, Gary, do you remember Sue when he was 19 years old?
Yeah, he was just a guy.
Yeah. Or did it take him until, I don't know, the back half of his junior year before he went from like a day 3 NFL pick to being one of the best players in the country? Like we're on this insane instant gratification trajectory and we saw this at times with Dylan Raiola, where there's people that just completely feel like he's a failed prospect because he's had a bunch of bad games in the middle of his freshman season. Yeah. Like there's no grace left for this anymore. Everything has to happen immediately, and it's only going to make player movement worse until they can figure out a way to slow it down. Like I would not want to be a college coach right now trying to figure out how you keep all of these guys happy, how you have to work within the NIL structure. It is a very, very difficult job. I do think Nebraska has a good benefit with Matt Rhule having been an NFL coach because I think that matters, and working in that environment and having an understanding of that environment matters more than ever.
Hey, we'll get you out. Yeah.
If have someone who has been in that would be a lot more difficult. Sorry.
Hey, we'll get you out here on this. Because this has been a busy week for the defensive line. The addition yesterday, addition of a position coach. In 9 months, and there may be a name or two added to this, if Nebraska rolled out on the defensive line, Judy, Van Poppel, Lenhart, Davis, Winery, even Simpson, who I really like in this recruiting class. I'm leaving Tyson Terry out because he's going to have to get that knee fixed. And you add another body, but maybe not on the level of the expectations or what Winery is going to bring. How would you feel about the defensive line?
I feel like I'm going to be fine. And part of that is I just have such a strong trust in Matt Rhule and his defensive lines throughout his career. As much as it's unfortunate to lose Terrence Knighton, I look at the work that happened, and you give a lot of credit to Knighton. But who coached Knighton and who trained Knighton to coach that way, and who's got the wealth of experience as a defensive line coach throughout his career, who's always had good defensive lines at every stop, whether it was the NFL or in college, Temple or Baylor. I just think Matt Rhule is a guy who knows defensive line play at a really high level, can coach it, can train his coaches to coach it, and can get the best out of his players. And you guys know how I feel about Riley Van Poppel. I think he's a future star. And so I think I'm still going to have confidence in that defensive line. You remember how we talked about the defensive line before 2023? And there was all this skittish nature and concern these guys hadn't cashed in. They hadn't, Ty Robinson hadn't been
Ty
good
and Nash.
enough. Nash Hutmaker hadn't been good enough. And then now it's, what are we going to do about Ty? What are we going to do about Nash?
Yeah.
I think you got to have some confidence that Matt Rhule is going to have those guys in that position group in particular in a good spot. I think there's more than enough talent. It's just going to be how quickly can Terry Braden, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, how quickly he can kind of come in and pick things up from Rhule and how they can get that room together. But I believe that the defensive line will be solid, and I think it'll always be solid under Matt Rhule.
Hey, great stuff, Shape. Have a great weekend. Always appreciate it. You guys have been killing it with everything going on this week.
Ray, I really appreciate it, guys, and